because I went through the same thing as a child. Like my mother had my father, obviously, and then they got married, and they ended up getting divorced, and then she got married again, and then they ended up getting divorced. It was always just me and my mom. But I actually had I got 3 younger brothers, but they stayed with my father.
Right.
It was just me and my older brother who kind of was like together because we were only like 1 year apart, and it was just us 2 and my mom. And I'm trying to think like how that affected me growing up, and in your situation where it's like, I'm the man of the house, then somebody comes in. Well, I got to be back the man of the house again. Somebody else. How do you feel like that affected you growing up?
You know, I mean, I didn't have a very close relationship with my real father. You know, that was a very abusive relationship that my mother was in. You know, there were pictures that I look at today of all of us in a picture. Everybody's in their naval uniform. And my mom, she explains in the picture, I wasn't tired. I had a black eye because your dad hit me in the face. And so she had to use makeup to cover it up because she was getting an award in the picture. She wasn't tired. I was like, whoa.
Wow.
And as an adult, I'm hearing this and I'm like, whoa.
Wow.
And so that's the reason why she separated from that relationship. And my stepdad, you know, it was, him and I got along great, you know, and it was structure, you know, and so, but ultimately they got divorced. But I've always had positive male role models in my healthy, positive role models. My grandfathers, my uncles, those were always in my life. So I was always raised with good, strong male figures, you know, that love God, that were seeking God, seeking how to do things the right way as well. So I never had that unbalance. But to be the man of the house, I mean, shoot, I mean, you try to tell that to a Navy corpsman, right, especially in the 80s, where being a woman in the military in the 80s and in the 70s, man, it isn't anything close to today. You know what I mean? She paved the way for a lot of women in what she went through. She was looked down on, you know, not literally spit on, but, you know, but it was just to be a woman in the 80s, in the 70s, and going into the 90s in the military. I mean, that was a hard life. And so she came home and brought that home. My mother and I had a conversation years ago, and she said, you know, I think that I was a little hard on you. And she said, I kind of think back that I wasn't compassionate enough with you. And so my whole life, it was tough, man. Like she built me into being somebody who was hard-nosed. And so you talk about consistency at XKO, you know, it's early to rise, early to bed. You know what I mean? A term in the military is, and I never served, but you would think I did, right?
Right.
But consistency came out of me being growing up with, to be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable.
Same way. My grandfather did me the exact same way.
Yeah.
What a story is pretty similar. Most single parent mothers have to play their dual role.
Oh yeah.
Of knowing how they already know how to be women,
right?
But they're trying to figure out, how do I raise this boy into a man when there's the absence of male presence in the home. Yeah, we may have, you know, father figures or male role figures outside of the house, but it's a different seeing it every day in a home.
Oh, it is.
Let's walk this structure of life that you was brought up in, because your mom was military, dad and stepdad was military, and so we know that there's benefits.
Oh yeah.
Of discipline, you know. But I want to talk about your teenage years.
Oh man.
Of the challenges, because I say challenges because I know I was a drug baby.
Yeah.
Drug to church, man. Right?
Yeah.
And early on in my early years, I didn't want to go, but I went because I had to. You know what I mean? And it was fun. You know, you got to sing in the church choir and, you know, stuff like that. Going church. You
gonna throw it back for us? You gonna take it back for us a little bit?
Yeah.
Come on now, you can bring a hymnal in here, man.
But the challenge, the challenge of discipline going to church, I noticed a challenge when I got in my teenage years.
Oh, yeah.
When I began to interact with unchurched kids, I began to desire to go other places that, they went that I knew my mom wasn't supportive of me going. So I say that to say, in your teenage years, what were the challenges of a disciplined home life?
The thing is, so you were drugged to church. I mean, that's my whole family. I look back on it now and I'm really blessed, man. My grandparents, my mother, just church was our foundation. We were going to church Wednesday night, how it is, Saturdays, sometimes Fridays, 2 times on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so that was always instilled in me. I would probably say my teenage years at this point, I was living we had just moved from Sacramento, California, to Ohio. And that is a culture shock. Cause I grew up in Oakland, it was rough back then, but I grew up in the Bay Area in California. And so going to Ohio, the Midwest still? Is that what's considered?
Considered so.
Dude, it was like somebody just dropped me off in no man's land. I'm like, man, what are cowboy boots? What are these tight jeans? And what is flannel? What is flannel even?
Right.
And so we went from a Raiders, Oakland A's kid to this. And so I was 13.
It is a big jump.
It is. I did not adjust well. Got in a lot of fights. But, I was 13. At this time, the reason why we had moved, my father had just been murdered.
Oh,
my biological father had just been murdered. And so I was 12 years old. My mother never told me about the relationship that they had, the abuse that was in that marriage. She said, I want you to meet your dad and you draw your own conclusion for him. And I'm 12 years old. So I go to meet my dad.
That's interesting.
And, he's a handsome dude. He was a boxer, Golden Gloves. It doesn't help the situation with him being abusive. Right. And he was, and he was, at this time, he had left the military. He was he was working as airport security. That's back when they had a suit and tie and a
right, right.
Before a TSA.
Like Secret Service.
Yeah. So he's, wide-eyed. He can't wait to meet me. He's a stranger to me, but he's my dad. And he's just green eyes, light-skinned dude. Just women loved him. He was a woman's man. Yeah, women loved him. And so I spent my summer getting to know my dad. And, he was deep into drugs, deep into womanizing.
This is when you met him, like after you met him?
Yeah, I met him at 12. Yeah, I spent the summer with him when I was 12. And every other night that we would go out, it was to go buy weed, go buy dope. And I'm learning, he's teaching me how to know what this is and what that is. And I'm like, street knowledge.
Shut up.
But I never in my life ever smoked weed, ever. Right. Because of that, I never did. And so here it is. I'm 12 years old. I meet my dad for the first time. Not the best experience, but he didn't know how to be a dad either. So I can't really fault him.
Right.
He didn't know what he was doing. So he was a great guy, fun guy, terrible dad, but he didn't know how to be a dad. So 13 years old, we moved to Ohio to be closer to my dad's family because we had just found out that he was murdered. He was buying drugs. His drug dealer tried to carjack him, shot him, and killed him.
Wow.
So my mom wanted me to be a part of his side of the family, get to know the family. That's why we moved there. 13 years old, I had anger issues. I lost my dad, this guy who I just met, and I acted out. And my mom didn't really know how to handle that. She just knew how to tighten down. So I was 13, moved to Ohio. I was always getting in fights in school because I didn't know how to adjust to what was around me. I had some pretty good friends. I mean, it was a normal kid playing ball, but then it was that line that I wasn't really prepared for because California was very diverse. Ohio, it was not. It was just black and white, and that was it. And people didn't know what I was. And so my teenage years were very different. So I would go play ball in Ohio. The black kids were like, well, you're not really black all the way, so you're not Hispanic. What's going on? The white kids were like, well, you're not really white. You're not Hispanic. What's really going on? And so it was really difficult for me to make friends based on that. But I was like, still, I'm going to do me. I'm gonna come out there, and that's where I had to build a tough skin. And so, for the kids that were accepting, black, white, Hispanic, and otherwise, I was building friendships.
Okay.
For the others that didn't want to accept who I got in fights. And I was a small kid, so you know how that goes. So my teenage years were very much of a lot of a balancing act. Got back into church, went to like private school, got back into church, and that was probably the best thing for me. You know, it got me out of the fights. I got assimilated into just like-minded people, and it didn't matter what I was on the outside, you know. And so I grew up without any animosity.
That's amazing. You said something. So you were 12 years old when your mom, and everything you said about her has been stand up.
Oh,
like,
she's awesome.
She's literally gave you most people would feel betrayed and take a person out of a situation completely. She told you, I want you to form your own opinion. Now, she could have been doing that saying, you're going to see for yourself.
Pretty much, bro.
But just to backtrack just a little bit, I want to know the day, okay, you're 12, he's murdered by the time you turn 13. You find out, you hear about it. What's your immediate emotion?
Oh, I was watching TV in the living room. I know it's very clear as day. I'm watching, it's in the evening. I'm home from school. My mom picks up the phone. Immediately she starts crying. And I'm looking at her, and I know something's off. It's not like a typical cry. Something's off. And she was telling, I got to tell you something. I was like, I was just talking to your grandma. And it's almost like I knew. It's like almost I knew. And she said, your dad's been murdered. And I kind of sat there, and I was just like, you know, you're 13 years old. How do you take that? He's your dad, but you don't know him as your dad.
Right.
But I was mad because somebody was taken away from me right when I'm starting to establish that connection. It would be different if I was 18 and him and I were able to establish a father-son bond over a course of 5 years. You know what I mean? But it's like from the jump, so I never even got a chance. It's like you got a taste and then it's taken away.
What Tupac say? He said, my father died and I couldn't cry because I couldn't cry for a stranger.
Yeah.